Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
The Ivory Coast is famous for its cocoa production, but there's another bean that's starting to get even more attention.
We produce our own coffee. You have more and more local roasters that are coming up. So before it was all about, importing coffee that's produced, in Europe.
Like chocolate, much of Africa's coffee is sold to be processed abroad. But can one West African entrepreneur bring homegrown and roasted coffee to the African market?
We teach a lot of things about coffee, things I never knew about. It's a new world they're discovering. And it's also, always kind of evolving.
On this week's special episode of the Next Africa podcast, I take a look at the growing popularity of specialty coffee inside Africa and meet one man who's looking to put Ivorian coffee on the map alongside Ethiopia, Kenya, and Uganda. I'm Jennifer Zabasajja, and this is the Next Africa podcast, bringing you one story each week from the continent, driving the future of global growth with the context only Bloomberg can provide. When it comes to coffee, the big players most consumers know are Brazil, Vietnam, Indonesia, and Colombia. While African farmers are making inroads on the global market, especially in East African countries like Ethiopia and Uganda, much of the coffee is shipped abroad whilst it's still green, with most of the roasting and consumption happening abroad. But Hadi Beydoun wants to change that. He's the entrepreneur behind Café Continent, a specialty coffee shop and roastery in the Ivorian economic hub of Abijan. I went to meet him at one of his roasteries to find out what it takes to build a new brand of homegrown coffee.
So I'm fourth generation Lebanese West African from West Africa, but I've been traveling a lot the past years, and I did my undergrad in Australia, in Sydney. And especially coffee culture over there was very, very developed. And after that, when I came back to the Ivory Coast, I saw that there was an opportunity. I took a lot of courses, and I started the project.
And you call it a project. Why do you use that term, not a business?
I guess initially it's not, for me, it's not just about making money. When you say business, it's always the financials. For me, there's more than just making money. It's an ideology. It's a philosophy. It's bringing people together. It's changing a paradigm. It's creating something new that basically maybe people were never thinking about in the past. It's about hiring a team of people that don't necessarily know much about this culture, this specialty coffee culture, working together on a specific mission, specific goals that are for the future of this continent. We produce our own coffee, because it's written on the glass, but no one sees that. No one understands that we roast our own coffee. Traditionally, that's how I guess people drink their coffee here. I would say there are two markets, right? There's the market that's like cheap coffee, the Nescafe kind of coffee, and also the cheap, powder ground coffee. And there's also the imported coffee. So there's two different segments. We intervene in the, obviously in the segment where people used to consume imported coffee, because quality-wise, this is what we're offering. We're offering a very high quality coffee. But what we are proposing is high quality coffee that is locally produced. So we have Ivorian coffee beans that we select from the different villages in the western part of the country. We usually go to those areas at least once a month. We tell them how we want the coffee to be kind of collected, the cherries basically, how the cherries should be dried, so on and so forth. So we go all the way to this part of production, and we have our own factory where we have very high technologically advanced equipment, good processes, and we have our coffee shops as well, where we control also the quality of the coffee that is brewed and that is basically sold to our customers.
In a moment, we'll have more from my interview with Hadi, including his ambitions to grow Café Continent as a brand. Plus, our soft commodities reporter, Mumbi Gitau, will join us to explain the state of the coffee market in 2025. Welcome back. Today we're talking African coffee, and back at Café Continent, I asked Hadi where he wants to see the company in 5 years' time.
Even here at the factory level, we've basically expanded. We've taken more and more space. We've also invested in new machines, higher capacity machines. But when it comes to our coffee shops, we started with one small coffee shop, 35 square meters. And then we developed other coffee shops. Now we have 3 operational coffee shops, and we're opening a 4th and a 5th one this year.
In the Ivory Coast?
In the Ivory Coast.
Okay.
So 4 are going to be in Abijan and 1 in San Pedro, which is another town in the west part of the Ivory Coast. And I'm actually working on a franchise model so that we can maybe start franchising our concept maybe at the end of the year.
Is the interest there?
Yeah, the interest has been there from the start. We've had people interested, asking about our concept, whether or not, they can collaborate, open the same thing in different, places around the world, different cities. We've had people interested.
Different cities globally?
Yeah, globally, yeah. Wow. 5-year goal for Café Continent would be, at least in West Africa, to be the #1 high-quality coffee actor. We are in the Ivory Coast, but we might not be in West Africa yet. So we have to develop also our brand in neighboring countries such as Ghana, Nigeria, Senegal, and so on and so forth. So this is something we need to work on. So open the first shops outside of the Ivory Coast, whether in the region or not, or whether in Africa or not, but be present in other places around the world.
So how challenging is the market for African coffee right now? Joining me is Mumbi Gitau, Bloomberg soft commodities reporter, back on the podcast. Mumbi, it's great to have you back. How are you doing?
I'm very fine. It's happy to be back.
It's really nice to have you. So, Mumbi, you have traveled the continent looking at a number of commodities. We're talking today about coffee. When we look at African producers and African coffee producers, how do they stack up against some of the other coffee producers globally?
When it comes to the African continent, a lot of focus is placed on Ethiopia, which is the biggest producer of Arabica beans. And we have Uganda, which is now the biggest producer of Robusta beans. That's within the African continent. But there is also focus on countries like Rwanda, Burundi, Kenya that produce what you'd consider specialty coffee. They do not export in huge tonnage like Ethiopia and Uganda, but they do produce the premium coffee that most of the European market prefer.
You talk about the European market, which we'll get to some of the export markets in a little bit, but we've had you on the podcast before talking about the rising and I guess the volatile price of chocolate, right, because of climate change. When we think about climate change, is it affecting the price of beans and the effects on coffee farmers as much?
So the story with cocoa, which is the ingredient in chocolate, is the same for coffee. The trees are quite similar in terms that they are tree crops and they have similar challenges when it comes to climate change. We reported earlier this year about coffee prices getting to record prices, and that was mainly because of drought in Brazil, and before that we had drought in Vietnam. So it's also, production is literally determined by how the weather and how the climate plays out in the key growers.
Is it attractive though for African coffee farmers as it is for African cocoa farmers? Can you compare those two for us?
They're both attractive depending on what the market is doing, depending on the price. So last year was a very good year to be a cocoa farmer, and still is right now if your market is liberalized. It was also a good time to be a coffee trader or a coffee farmer at the start of this year. The thing is that with coffee, we have a lot more producers. So if one country is lacking, then another country will pick up. But with cocoa, we have 2 big producers in Africa. So it's easy for them to kind of benefit when the market is heading up because they are the sole place where the world is reliant on.
Is there something that we should be watching for when it comes to African coffee farmers? And I say that because this independent entrepreneur that I met in the Ivory Coast, he's really making a push to get the global consumers to understand more about this African, the beans and the specialty coffee and just how rich it is. What is it that maybe we should know and we should be watching for? And you as a soft commodities reporter that you're looking at?
Not just as a soft commodities reporter. I come from Kenya, where we used to be one of the biggest producers of coffee in Africa, and that's no longer the case. But still, Kenya is one of the biggest producers of specialty coffee, same as Rwanda, same as Ivory Coast, same as other smaller origins in Africa. I think the key for them is value addition, and the entrepreneur you met with, that's a good way to try and capture the market, because if you look at the supply chain, the farmer receives about 5 to 10% of the retail price of coffee, whereas the rest of the margin goes to the trader, and a huge margin also goes to the roaster. Roasters like Nestle, such big companies tend to take up that kind of a margin. So if Africa was going to grow in its coffee production and it's in revenue and income, they need to focus more on value addition, creating their own roasteries, selling their own coffee, drinking their own coffee. I think that's a good place to start. Growing up, we didn't drink a lot of coffee, we drank a lot more tea. So if Africa was to boost its own consumption, rather than exporting all its coffee to the European and the American markets, then there'll be more room for growth for the farmers and their income.
Are those trends changing? Do you see that?
Some countries, the trend seems to be changing. I mean, Ethiopia is a predominantly coffee drinker, but there are countries like Kenya, Uganda, where coffee consumption is trying to make inroads, but it's only within the urban centers where you find maybe a Java or an upscale art cafe where the younger millennials or the Gen Z are happy to grab a cup and almost like brag with it on Instagram. But we just need to get that more at-home consumption where it's a consideration for breakfast. The same way in Europe, everyone gets coffee for their breakfasts.
And this is a tradition that I do with you, Mumbi. How do you like your coffee? Do you do you drink coffee?
Jen, I don't know why you do this to me.
I have to. You're Kenyan, and you're not just a soft commodities reporter. Do you like coffee?
Should I lie or should I tell the truth? I
truth.
do like coffee only when I really need the caffeine boost. But I am really a tea drinker, and after having the water boiled, there's always this controversy whether you add the milk first or the tea bag first. But I put my water in tea bag and then milk later. But I think I am warming up to coffee slowly. It's slow. Let's start with instant, then we're going to get to the lattes and the cappuccinos much later.
Still has a place in this podcast because, of course, tea is a very big market for Kenya. So appreciate that insight. Thanks so much, Mumbi Gitau, and thank you also to Hadi Beydoun, the founder of Café Continent, for showing me around his roastery in Abijan. This program was produced by Adrian Bradley and Tiwa Adebayo. Don't forget to follow and review the show wherever you usually get your podcasts. I'm Jennifer Zabasajja. Thanks as always for listening.